I disappointed people. I even lost subscribers. So why did I quit? Why did I quit at 60%? Why did I quit the beloved fantasy epic by Steven Erikson, Gardens of the Moon? All right, a little history. I've been planning to read this novel for some time, many, many years, because I've heard so many great things about it. I even dabbled. I dabbled a little bit. I read a little bit of the prologue a few years ago. Something about it was reminiscent about what I heard, right? I heard this was a difficult book. I heard it was confusing. I heard there were so many POVs, not much exposition, and you would get lost, right? It was difficult. It was work, let's say. Reading this book was work, and so I thought, hey, let me dedicate an entire read along where I read the book much more closely, much more carefully, and I think I'm going to get the most out of it. So if you thought I quit this book because I found it difficult, because I found it confusing, because I found just myself completely lost, you are wrong. That is not why. I actually didn't have a very difficult time keeping track of this stuff. Sure, there were some things that I didn't pick up on or that I missed that people had read the series, commented before, and alerted me of. But overall, I'd say it was a pretty easy reading experience, right? With the exception of a couple things because, of course, I quit. I thought this novel was going to be somewhere right in the middle of something like a Brandon Sanderson novel where it's, quote unquote, superhero fantasy, or something more low fantasy like George R. R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire. Something that has deep character work, subverting tropes, and doing all kinds of amazing things with multiple POVs, many POVs I might add. And when I started the book, I think I was right because I didn't feel like it was veering too low fantasy, but also not into the realm of superhero fantasy where we have these all-powerful people who are blasting spells, talking with gods, even the gods are talking with them, and walking among us, right? So when I was reading the prologue, in fact, I was a little bit wrong because there was a lot of magic going on, and I quickly found out that in the second chapter, in fact, how much spectacle, right, was going to be apparent in this novel. So I'm going to divide this into a couple categories: subjectivity and objectivity, right? Because we know that not every novel is for everybody, right? And this one is clearly not for me because I'm making this video. But you may be saying, well, this is a novel. Everything is subjective. Well, I'm going to throw the objective stuff into a category that is called storycraft, right? So whether or not you believe that's objective or not, I believe it is a craft in its own right. And therefore, that is how I'm going to label it. So beginning with subjectivity, I don't care for superhero fantasy, and that is exactly what this became, right? As I got deeper into it, right, there was just so much stuff going on that magic was far too ubiquitous for my taste. I prefer it low. I prefer it mysterious. I prefer it only known by a select few. I don't want to see it be labeled as a profession. Here, it is a profession. There are many, many people who practice it. There are many, many people who are very powerful in it, right? At least the ones we are presented with. I prefer a book where maybe there is one person who knows these dark arts, who dabbles, right? Who knows secrets that the other characters don't know. We had more than a handful in this novel. And so already I was kind of getting tired of that concept, right? But I pressed on, until we started having the gods literally walk and talk about us, right? They weren't literally on Earth, I guess. They were talking with characters. And in fact, those characters talk to them like they were anybody else, like they weren't these magnificent immortal beings, right? All powerful. No. And so then it started to bother me a little bit too much, which veered into the territory of plot over character, which I believe is a good segue. So plot over character, what does that mean? Well, that means exactly what it says, right? It's plot over character. It's less emphasis on character arcs and development and more on an interesting plot. The key word being interesting. I didn't find the plot very interesting. And that is the shortcoming here, right? You have characters like James Bond as a good example. With the exception of the more modern films, he doesn't arc in the older stuff. It's all about the intricate plot. Something like a Christopher Nolan film. He has leaned into character a little bit in movies like Inception, but for the most part, he is more of a concept guy. He's more of a plot guy. And you can tell that Mr. Erikson is much more of a plot guy. He may have thought he was doing some great character work here. I believe there is the hints of it, right? There's the beginnings of it, but he was trying to do too much too soon, I believe, because he killed off characters that we didn't care about and turned them into profound, pivotal characters. And what does that mean? When you don't care about a character and you're transforming them into a quote-unquote chosen one or some other vessel, right? It means we don't care. We care when there are stakes. When people aren't resurrected from the dead a few chapters in. That is when you veer into plot over character. Now I know what you're saying. Hey, you get to book 5. It all makes sense. It's all amazing. You understand what this cringy scene was in chapter 2 all the way in book 5. I don't care because I am a firm believer that any kind of media, book, movie, graphic novel, whatever it may be, needs to work as you progress through it. Things that are awesome later on and make stuff in book one or film one make even more sense are extra, right? They're Easter eggs maybe. They have absolutely nothing to do with you enjoying what came before. What they should do is enhance what came before. And I know a lot of people out there had read the series completely, maybe multiple times when they were checking out my video series. So they just have a very different perception of what I'm experiencing, right? You can never experience something over again for the first time. And so I understand that. I appreciate their commentary and informing me of things that they may have missed or clarifying some things I didn't quite get. But as a first-time reader of this novel, of the series, I'll tell you right now that there was a lot to be desired. This is not a terrible novel by any stretch, right? I made it 60%. I really wanted to finish it. I really did. I just couldn't take it anymore. After that last book, right? Because the book is divided into books, I just had to decide, you know what? There's no point in going on. I stopped while I was more or less ahead. There was one occasion where I'm like, okay, this is veering into plot over character and chosen one territory. And then another event happened, and I actually called it more or less before I even read it in a video. And that's when it really clicked for me that this is way more about plot than it is about character. I personally prefer character-driven stuff. Something where you can truly empathize, walk beside, understand these characters. And unfortunately, that was not here for me, with the exception of maybe Whiskey Jack. I think he was the one character that I truly empathized with, the leader of this group of bridge burners. But funny enough, there was another chapter, a chapter of I believe he was not even named, right? It was a scene actually about a messenger, and we learned about his past, about where he lived even, right? And we learned about all of this stuff in the span of a very short scene. And I was hooked. So I know Erikson has the chops. I just wish he would have taken those skills and put them into the characters that are front and center, because I think we'd have a far, far greater book if he would have done that. All right, let's talk about what I'm going to label as objectivity. I have been informed that this book was planned to be a film at one point. Maybe there's a script, maybe there wasn't. And you can tell because the writing is very cinematic. And by cinematic, I mean very short scenes that cut between multiple POVs quite often, just like we see in films, right? You see the assassin sneaking across the roof, hard cut. 2, adversary sneaking off behind him. The first one doesn't know. We know, right? It's putting the omniscient person, us being the viewer, the reader in this case, in a different visual space where we know both sides of the story. The problem is there are so many characters, there are so many things going on in this book that we ended up with what I would like to call redundancy. And what I mean by that is that we would be given information, right? We'd see a scene play out by one POV only to be hypothesized, contemplated, even decided by another POV, which led to, obviously, redundancy, right? Because I kept telling myself, I know this already, we know this already, and that is the danger, that is the challenge even of creating so many POVs. It's not easy to do. George R. Martin is one of the few, if not the only author I've ever read that has successfully created compelling characters and balanced so many POVs. And this, like I said, this is the danger of it because it is not easy. And so I can picture Erikson sitting here saying, oh, well, this character doesn't know what happened over here. Sure, the reader does, but the character doesn't. So to make it realistic, I need to make sure that they go through the thought processes of figuring out why something is happening. Sounds challenging, doesn't it? It is. And unfortunately, it doesn't work here because you could have cut at least 25% of this novel out if it would have been written differently, right? Written with less redundancy. And it became tired. I became very bored with it because I kept reading scenes that were literally just other POVs processing what I already knew. Sure, it made sense in the world, right? Sure, it made sense that they didn't know what was going on, so they had to think about it. They had to come to a conclusion, but there's probably a better way to do it. Maybe you shouldn't have so many POVs if you're not able to manage that. That's why I think it's probably far better a way to do it as George R. Martin did, where it's a POV per chapter, right? In this, we found many, many POVs per chapter. But anyway, to me, that belongs strictly in the writing craft category, which is why I'm going to talk about it objectively, right? I'm not talking about, this is my opinion. I don't like high fantasy. I don't like gods walking among men. I don't like magic to be a profession that everybody knows. I don't like superhero, chosen one stuff. That's all subjective. And you may like that, and that's totally fine. I just need to say that I think it's important to designate these two things because somebody who is maybe watching this video who has decided to come to this novel and isn't quite sure if they should read it, or maybe they are reading it and they're wondering if they should quit it because they agree with me in these regards. And so that is why I'm articulating these things. Hopefully I'm doing it well enough. Hopefully you understand. Even if you disagree with me, hopefully you can understand where I'm coming from. Because as we know, not every book is for everybody, like I always said. And I want to make sure that I don't want you to think I'm trashing on this novel. I think it was a serviceable novel. I just decided it wasn't for me. Yes, there are some things from a craft standpoint that really bothered me, but clearly they didn't bother many, many people out there, and that is totally okay. But let me know your thoughts. Have you read this book? Did you quit this book? Did you quit it for a different reason than I did? Or do you completely disagree with me? I'd love to hear it in the comments below. Thanks for hanging out with me. And at the very least, I hope this video made you feel okay. It is very okay to quit something you aren't happy with. All right, thanks. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.